Welcome to episode 9 of Civil War Breakfast Club. I am your co-host, Mary, and joining me is the awesome Darren Weeks.
Wow, awesome. I knew when I gave you those publicity the last couple of times I did the intro, I knew I'd get some payback for this. I'll take awesome. Compared to the other words you've called me, we'll take that. A lot of those other words start with A as well, but that's another story.
Actually, they start with F. Fucker.
That's right. Yep, there goes. All right, well, there you go. 13 seconds.
You have
to write it. And once again, the capital E is next to this broadcast on iTunes. So anyway, how are you, Mary? How are you today? I noticed your hair looks so different today.
Yes. For those that aren't or who are listening, I have my hair pulled back in a ponytail tonight, and I usually just wear it down. So
hey, it's it's so different. But anyway, yeah. So how's your week been? How's everything going? You have a good weekend?
I did, thank you. Yes, it was good. We had a great live on Saturday.
Oh, we did, certainly.
So, yeah, that was pretty awesome. Saw a bit of Boston on Sunday.
Yeah, a little bit of the city on Sunday. Going to see my home city. They'll have some time in. I can't talk today. Wow, spent some time in the city and got to have a good time with that, and that was fun, certainly. But yeah, to your point, the live was great. Well, everybody who signed on to that gets an A for the day because there was a lot of people jumping onto it and having a good time with it, and we have fun because people are really into it. And that reminds me, right at the beginning, of our upcoming Civil War Breakfast Club Roundtable, which is going to be, this is going to drop on Saturday morning.
Yep.
So it'll be like the following Wednesday, and we'll get that information out. So you can send your emails to civilwarbreakfastclub@gmail.com.
.com.
Okay. Yep. And so if you're interested, we'll do it. And the lovely Queen of the North will email you a copy of the Zoom link, and you can participate. We'll talk about that, but that'll be pretty cool. That's a conversation for another day. But overall, we put Chickamauga, and I put a nice little bow on it last week.
Yeah, we did.
It seemed like it did pretty strong. Much more learned now. Certainly got to talk about Chickamauga, which is cool.
Well, you rocked it. Well, how was your weekend?
Well, it was one of those things, just one of those things. Got to hang out a little bit, had some fun.
Yep.
A little long weekend here. And, oh, by the way, that reminds me, happy Thanksgiving belated.
Well, thank you.
To our friends up there across the border. We had holiday here. We had Columbus Day here. I believe they still call it. And so we had Monday off. It was nice to have a long weekend, but now it's back to the grind again. Now it's time to get back to the podcast, get back to work, and get ready for another exciting topic.
Yes.
Hey, I was going to tell you, did you know, I don't know if you knew this, but did you know that George McClellan didn't get along with Lincoln?
I'm shocked.
Well, a lot of people don't know that. A lot of people don't.
Speaking of George McClellan, what beer are you drinking tonight?
Oh, my God. Good catch. Tonight, I am drinking from Antietam Brewery, Little Mac IPA.
1 million IBUs.
And it's slow going. Since it is Antietam Brewery, I'm drinking out of the Antietam coffee mug. So that's my libation for the evening. And I think this is a good one. It's a good solid IPA. Pretty soft. You've been to Antietam Brewery? Anybody out there, definitely go. It's a cool little place to go. And last time we went there, they had no power, which sucked. But the time before that, I went to buy some beer. And this is my last one.
Oh, so you saved it for nice?
This is my Antietam battle one because it's the last one for McClellan. See what I did there?
Okay. Oh, nice. It's almost like you planned that, Weeks.
No, I was up all night practicing that, Mary, matter of fact.
Look at you go.
I know. I do my best.
Well, I am drinking Hazy Sunset from Bayfield Brewing Company, which is just 15 minutes down the road from me. And I'm drinking it out of my John Reynolds mug, who I may or may not mention John Reynolds on the show tonight. I'm kind of thinking I just might be.
I think you might. I also think there might be an O.O. Howard mention at some point this evening. I think there probably will. I think there'll be a lot of things we're going to talk about tonight. But I think tonight's podcast topic, if you haven't guessed it yet, is going to be about the McClellan-Lincoln relationship. And a lot of stuff that's come out about that over the years. We're going to talk about maybe some perception versus reality. Of all the stuff I've read about specifically this topic, everyone talks about McClellan and all of the mistakes and the slow and the overestimating the numbers and all the stuff that you read about, the top line stuff. But there's not a lot of stuff talked about regarding why he was that way. What was his issue with Lincoln? What was the crux of the problem with them two? And we're going to look at that a little bit. We're going to kind of go back in time to the end of 1861, and we're going to talk about maybe what the issue was and see if we can try to figure out maybe and let the folks decide for themselves if was Mac justified being pissed? Was he overreacting? Was Lincoln, did he overstep a little bit? Did we? I mean, did he? That's my Riley pool. We'll look at that, and you can decide for yourself, Mary. We'll find out. We'll see what the masses think.
Yep. No, and I think this is a great topic. Last week when we first talked about it, we were going to do just talking about a little bit after Antietam and what happened with the meeting between Lincoln and McClellan, but then Darren had this great idea to explore the relationship between the two of them. I think it gets back to what's called historical memory. Mm-hmm. There's certain parts of it that aren't actually looked at or explored. Like if you say George McClellan, the first word that comes to mind is slow. He was arrogant. He was like a thorn in Lincoln's side, just things like that. But it's like anything to do with the Civil War. When you start looking at it a little bit deeper, you start to see a different side of it. And just to be clear to our listeners, we're not completely going 100% with McClellan on this. We're also not bashing Lincoln at all. We're looking at it, I would say, objectively, and we're exploring evidence that is there just to show that there's two sides to every story. And I think sometimes Mac gets thrown under the bus a little bit too much.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, you mentioned a couple of these. We'll look at the national perception is a thing, but also public memory is another thing. What people nowadays say. So you just look at some of the words comparing Lincoln and McClellan. So you look at Lincoln, you think of
honest.
You think of honest. You think of the great emancipator. You think of save the Union. You think of martyr. You think of the man of sorrows. That was my favorite one. But then you think of McClellan. You think of narcissist, right? You think of self-pity, hubris. He was probably the guy who returned the Tupperware without washing it, probably.
Oh, he totally would have been that fucker.
He was that guy on the hot day where we said, hot enough for you. That's all that stuff.
One of my favorite songs.
You just yeah, exactly. But but time goes on. Think of like a seesaw where Lincoln gets more and more one direction and McClellan gets more and more the other direction. Doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just that's what the public memory is. And I think when you look at the whole thing, and it still goes on. I remember, years ago, back when the U.S. was fighting Iraq. We talked about this last night a little bit.
Yep.
George Bush had a lieutenant general by the name of Ricardo Sanchez. Remember him? Mm-hmm. You don't. Whatever. Okay, but let's.
No, I do. I remember.
Do you really?
War. Yes.
Okay.
My grandparents had it all the time, and I practically lived with them.
Okay, Ricardo Sanchez. he didn't get along with George Bush. They argued. They fought. They eventually left. And you know what they called him in the media? Bush's McClellan. Mm-hmm. I thought it was cool. I mean, not so much the Gulf War, but I mean, as far as how McClellan, even today, was brought up when there's a conflict between a president and a general, McClellan's name still to this day gets brought up. And that's the public memory. That's the whole public memory about George McClellan. Right or wrong? I mean, look, we've all done things, okay, that people remember us for, the good, the bad, and the ugly, especially you. And so as time goes on, you have to look at what's reality and what's not. And, and this isn't so much a fact-finding mission per se, and I've always wondered, and this is what was a good exercise to your point, I've always wondered, what was it about Lincoln that he just got under his burr under his saddle, that freaking phrase is?
Under the McClellan saddle.
Out of the McClellan saddle, yes. And I think there's a lot of it. And I think in researching, there's a lot of interesting things did come out. And not to say one's right or wrong, but it's just interesting. And you can make up your own friggin' minds. And you know what? If you don't like it, then who cares? But it's just what it is. So let's real quick kind of go with McClellan real quick. We talked about this real quick. George Benton McClellan, everybody knows him. West Point class of 1846, graduated with Pickett, the great Cadmus Wilcox, A.P. Hill, and Stonewall Jackson.
Yep.
And everybody knows he fought in Mexico under Winfield Scott. He was only 35 years old in Antietam. I mean, he was still a young guy for the most part. He hadn't fully grown yet. Obviously,
he was one of the younger ones.
He was still little.
Literally and figuratively.
Yeah. He was an administrator. He was the president of a railroad before the war. People don't realize, and maybe they do, he had a lot of success early. He won those wars, those battles early in the war in West Virginia, Battle of Philippi. He won, and it really got him a lot of attention because that was the first land war. This is back in June of 1861. So it was the first land battle, of the Civil War. And he got famous for that because what was going on not soon after that was First Manassas. We saw McDowell basically peed down his leg. And he wasn't going to be able to do that much more. But after that Battle of Philippi, he's promoted. The New York Herald calls him Young Napoleon. He gives him that nickname. And I'm sure he loved that, by the way. Lincoln ended up promoting him to commander of the Army of the Potomac after that first Bull Run loss. And we've talked about this a million times. First thing he does, he looks at the Army and says, this Army's shit.
Yep.
It's a bunch of farmers, a bunch of carpenters. I got to train these guys. So he spends about the next 9 or 10 months or so really building and training and drilling these guys into what he called a capable army.
Mm-hmm.
right? He decides to take his army on the road, ends up doing the Peninsula Campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where he starts to get the reputation of being timid and sluggish. And everything was going on with that campaign. The Magruder thing at Jamestown comes to mind, where he's waiting outside of the battlefield and he sees the Magruders marching the same guys around in a circle over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And McClellan thinks it's all these soldiers coming in. He's, oh shit, they got so many guys. And it ends up being a complete mess. 7 days battle comes along not soon afterwards. In the meantime, Joseph Johnson gets hurt.
Yeah.
The Seven Pines. I mean, we will call it Seven Pines, by the way. Thank you very much.
Yeah, also called Fair Oaks. That's actually...
Boy, did you get pissed on today with that.
I was not pissed off about it. He's lying. I was not pissed off about it.
Guess what? But, it brings on the 7 days battles. This is that week from June 25th to July 1st. And he gets near Richmond. Basically, he's so close. The whole thing kind of falls apart. He ultimately gets fired. They bring in Pope. We talked about Second Manassas, and the whole thing fell apart. And this is really the beginning of when you really start to see, well, maybe publicly anyway, you start to really see McClellan start to really stew. Mm-hmm. He starts to get pretty pissed off. This is when he's writing his wife about the original guerrilla, all this stuff, and
he's calling Seward a puppy. Wells is a garrulous old woman. He hates Stanton with a passion, and that is going to really show after the Battle of Antietam. Mm-hmm. That he does not like Edwin M. Stanton at all. Although
does anybody
I'm not
know?
a huge fan of Stanton, actually.
No.
I'll just put it out there. I'm not.
No, as you research more of Stanton, we should do a podcast someday on why Stanton sucks. Just call it Why Stanton Sucks.
Yeah.
And just call it that, We did a whole podcast on Second Manassas, and John Pope comes over from the west and gets pantsed. He ends up getting beat. And now it goes back to that situation where Lincoln's like, shit, what the friggin' hell do I do now? They have that meeting with the cabinet on September 2nd, 1862 rather, and everyone thinks he's going to get McClellan gone, just whatever the hell we're going to do. Pope's gone, but we're not bringing McClellan back. And then Lincoln changes speed, brings in McClellan, lets him be in charge of Washington, D.C., and for the defenses, and let him fuck around with that.
Yep.
But then Lee, on the 5th of September, invades the North. He invades Maryland. And so now Lincoln needs a commander. He needs a field commander. He brings back in McClellan.
Yep.
The troops love it. They're all riding around yelling, Mac is back, Mac is back. Who assumed that's what they would talk about? Maybe the Big Mac was on at the McDonald's. At the McDonald's, it's
and the Monopoly game was happening too at that time.
Well, that's what they were trying to get those pieces, the Lego pieces.
Exactly.
There you go.
It's Lego. They were after the Legos.
Mac, he ends up doing the Maryland campaign. Yeah, he has his mistakes, Special Order 191, and he does all the stuff that everybody talks about. But he does, I guess he wins the battle. I mean, people say it's like a tie, but he basically wins. He pushes off.
It was enough of a win for Lincoln to know that he could release the emancipation. It was what he had been waiting for because Lee was back across the river again. So that was enough of what Lincoln needed in order to get the emancipation out there. Which, I mean, him putting McClellan back in was both from a military perspective, standpoint, in that he had to use the tools he had. And that was exactly what he told his cabinet. There was nobody else. He knew McClellan could organize the shit out of those men, and he knew that McClellan could raise the morale. But the other reason he did it too is McClellan was a Democrat, and he needed Democrat support for the emancipation as well as for the election.
And of course, McClellan, he's going to take the victory lap. I got that quote from it. He writes to his wife.
Yeah.
Where he writes, picture the flowery music in the background. Picture Lorena playing in the background. Okay. Why don't you sing Lorena like you did the other night while I do this?
Did I sing Lorena the other night? No, I didn't.
Well, how much did I drink?
Okay. What happened?
All right. So he writes to his wife, whose name is Mary, again, so you know what she's all about.
Yeah.
Those in whose judgment I rely on tell me that I fought the battle splendidly and that I was a masterpiece of art. I paid all that I could be asked to save the Union twice in this country. Twice, he says. I feel little pride in having, with a beaten and demoralized army, defeated Lee so utterly well. Of these days, history will, I trust me, do justice. So he's saying, for one, he saved the Union twice. Well, I assume he's talking about when he took over after Bull Run. I assume.
That's absolutely what he's talking about.
Okay,
because he wrote letters back then. One of the lines in them was, I appear to have been called upon to save the land. And that's...
You know how many times I've said that? I've been nickel for every time I said that phrase.
Well,
I guess you can just edit that one right out. Okay. but what is he does say a couple of things. Yeah, nice pause. But he does talk a little bit, though, some things that do make sense. It gives you a little bit of insight, though, on what's going on. He says, basically, I feel little pride in having with a beaten and demoralized army. And he's actually right about that. Because when he takes over Pope's army, the army's a mess. He has to merge 3 armies. We talked about this before. Army of the Potomac, Army of Virginia, in the expedition, North Carolina Expeditionary Group from Burnside. He's got to put all 3 together. Some of them like Mac, some of them don't like Mac. So he's taken over and taken them into battle, a group of soldiers who just got their ass thoroughly whipped. It's Second Manassas. And now they're invading the North, and they're like, well, shit, here we go again. So they were demoralized. There's no question they were definitely demoralized.
Yeah.
So as you know, eventually he is going to sit in camp, and he's going to wait, and he's going to wait, and he's going to wait. We're going to talk more in detail about this in a little while. But we're just doing we're doing what's called the big picture, Mary, right now. And then we're going to go down to the smaller picture. Okay, you cool with this?
I'm cool with it.
You're not going to give me shit later for this?
No. Well, no guarantee. No.
Okay, no promises. All right, so big picture, he's going to sit at Sharpsburg and he's going to wait. Lincoln's going to get mad. And so Lincoln's going to say, do something, and he's going to ultimately end up jumping on the Acela and taking a ride over to Maryland. Probably had a presidential pass to get there quick, probably at the front seat. Okay. So he finally got there, and he meets with him. And he says, you know what? You need to go get him. You need to go chase him down. McClellan. This is all perception right now. We're going to talk more in detail about this stuff. McClellan basically says, no, go stick it in your big tall hat. I'm going to sit here and relax. Right. And then a few weeks later, McClellan gets fired. He gets the old heave ho. He gets right. And then it kind of goes from there. And then it ends up with McClellan finally leaving the stage of the military. You see him later on in the presidential election of 1964, where he's going to ultimately lose. He's going to write a gigantic 476-page book. So it's basically like a Coddington book that is going to rip Lincoln and the horse you rode in on, everything he could possibly think of against Abraham Lincoln. So that's the big picture. And I think as we look at this, it just seems that that old movie there, Anchorman, this escalated quickly, right? This escalated quickly.
It did.
So what happened?
What happened between them?
What
happened? I think you have to go back to the Peninsula campaign.
Play the counselor right now. They're both sitting in front of you right now. No, they're looking away at each other. They're pissed. You bring them together. Say, guys, what happened between you two? What's the story?
I think McClellan would say, go back to the Peninsula campaign and look at what happened with my original plan to go through Urbana.
I think it's even before that. I think it's before the Peninsula campaign. I think it goes back to the very end of First Manassas, right? So, I mean, if you take a peek at it, First Manassas happens. The whole thing's a mess. It's a complete disaster, and he basically ends up taking over at that point from McDowell. So he's back in DC, gets pushed back. Joseph Johnston and his army is still sitting in Manassas. They probably had some kind of extended stay at the Quinta Inn. So they were still sticking around there, the one off the highway there, if you've been there. He wants to basically, to deal with this one way or the other. Joseph Johnston's still going to hang around. He's not going to leave. Lincoln wants him out. Lincoln says, you know what? He's way too close to Washington. We got to get him the fuck out of there. He can't. We can't have an army that big 30 minutes in the city. Just, despite the Beltway traffic, it would take him 4 days to get there. But he doesn't want them there. This is where McClellan comes up to your point, the Urbana plan.
Yeah.
So we're talking December 1861, mid-December, right around there. Yep. Christmas lights are out. Probably very pretty looking. And he plans the Urbana campaign, which basically he's going to merge his army with the Navy that we're going to see later on in Vicksburg. We're going to see this in Vicksburg down the road. He wants to take his troops and he wants to put them on the boats. He wants to steam down the Potomac into the Chesapeake Bay area, get onto the Rappahannock River, and sail upstream to Urbana. And that's when he wants to attack the Confederates. That's what he wants.
Yep.
And Lincoln pulls out his not so fast, my friend card.
The stuff that Lincoln does here completely stalls McClellan. When I was reading about this in more detail earlier today, when I was doing some more research about it, the Urbana plan just sounds a little bit like what was done at Vicksburg, but it sounds like a really great plan on paper. But timing was everything with this. And because Lincoln was like, whoa, here's my plan, writes McClellan, and McClellan's got to read over his plan. McClellan writes him back and says, dude, I'm insistent, let's do my plan. So then Lincoln's like, okay, well, then you got to put it to a vote. You got to have a war council and you got to put it to a vote. And it's just like, McClellan must have been like, holy fuck, this is a war.
Oh, Mac is pissed because Lincoln loses his patience. He wants, he says, listen, fuck that. You're not doing that plan. Okay. You can plan your boat later. Okay. Here's what we're going to do. I want an all-army assault on Johnson. I want you to go right directly against Johnson, go southwest of Manassas, and just go get him. And Mac is like, so he's pissed off. So he's like, well, he's still going to sit there. So McClellan says, you know something, I got to go to Washington and talk to this freaking guy. So he goes to the White House, and he meets with McClellan. Dude, what's the word?
You fucker. No.
Pretty much.
Dude, fuck you.
He basically says, this plan will work. He says, this is an aggressive plan and we have to do it. Lincoln appears to acquiesce to this though.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if he just basically says, something, to your point, okay, fine, here's what you got to do. You got to do it, but I want you to take your 12 division commanders and you got to put a vote to them.
Yep.
It ends up being 8-4 in favor of McClellan. In case you're curious, I did look up the vote. He gets what he wants. But to your point, what is he losing?
He's losing time. And
he's losing time
to the point where Johnston has withdrawn and he's no longer there. So Urbana is no longer an option. And the other thing that happens to Mac in this time is the Quaker gun incident.
Yeah.
Where it turns out that they weren't real guns.
Happens a lot to Mac.
The entire time. It's a string of bad luck. And Mac should have known. But at the same time, like Lincoln took away a lot of time in having to, be like, no, I don't want you doing this plan. Here's what I think should be done. And then Mac's having to go to Washington. And then Lincoln's like, okay, put it to a vote.
Well, and for whatever reason, how you get obsessed with stuff and it gets in your head.
Yeah.
And it just, you got to have it. He was obsessed with this plan.
He was
obsessed.
It was his baby. It was his baby and he loved it.
It was his Chickamauga. It was his baby.
It was his baby.
It was Chickamauga's Chickamauga, And so he's obsessed with this. Lincoln doesn't want Washington, D.C. exposed. And that's the whole point. He's afraid that if he takes and goes around, tries to get behind them, they're going to march on D.C. And maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. But to your point, we just said, February 22nd, which is the drop-dead date that they wanted to attack by, comes and goes. McClellan's still there. Finally, Lincoln says, you got to fucking go. And when he starts to move, what happens? Johnson leaves.
Yeah.
So Joseph Johnson's no longer Manassas anymore. So from December until the end of February, they were sitting there on their asses, literally doing nothing, while the Confederates regrouped, they trained, and they got the hell out of Dodge.
Yeah.
So it was a huge opportunity missed for the Union.
Yeah, and McClellan has to he does retool his plan to disembark from Fortress Monroe and advance up the peninsula that way, and that's when you get into the Peninsula Campaign.
Yeah. Before we jump on the peninsula, okay, think about your own life for a second. You're going to be McClellan for a second here. You guys are at the same site. You're a 5'4" angry person too. So we'll put you right in that spot, okay?
Jeez.
You're obsessed with something you really want to do. Okay, you got to have it. Okay.
Yeah.
And you see your boss, okay, back at your job, okay, at the Dairy Queen. She doesn't write the Dairy Queen.
But Dairy Queen.
I'd love Dairy Queen right now, though. It's so hot down here. Think about your job, okay, and there's something you really, really, really want to do.
Yep.
And then your boss meddles and dilly-dallies and everything else you could think of. This is what I want to do. Maybe he's kind of fucking me around so I can't do what I want to do. And then it doesn't happen. How would you feel?
I would feel I had one job to do, and I'm trained to do this job. And the person that is technically not trained to do the job is kind of meddling. And I mean, for Lincoln, though, he was trying. He was going and reading books on military stuff, and he didn't fully understand it. And I'm sure he had opinions coming at him from all over the place, pressure you wouldn't believe. And I mean, McClellan's got a huge ego on him. So that's another thing to consider in this is if he's got that huge ego and he's had this plan and it's just basically been shot down and then he can't do it for whatever reason. Yeah, there's going to be a little bit of anger starting to form there.
And this is a guy, McClellan, West Point or all that stuff. This is a military guy. This is a guy who was, in his mind, he's been told he's a young Napoleon. He's living the life. And he sees this guy who is not really a military guy, who is a political guy. And this is really the first time that maybe McClellan's starting to think a little bit of you know what, I need to do my friggin' job here. And this guy's standing in my way. So he deals with that. And then the next step along the way is the peninsula, to your point.
Yeah.
So the peninsula is another one that, and this is another one where you look at maybe how much of a meddler that Lincoln actually was. So, Lincoln, he was very active in the military. He wasn't as active as, say, Jeff Davis was, though. Jeff Davis thought it was George Washington fighting for independence. So it goes back to the peninsula in 62, the 7 Days battles. There's that story that we talked about yesterday that a lot of people don't really research as much. What we know about the peninsula in the 7 days is, McClellan's army gets on the peninsula of Virginia, and they're going to try to take Richmond. And they kind of inch their way up the peninsula. They fight and they fight and they fight, and they get pretty close. They get pretty close. Battle of Seven Pines. Joseph Johnson is May 31st, the same day as who gets injured? On May 31st.
Oliver Otis Howard gets shot twice in his right arm and has to have it amputated.
And luckily for him, it grew back.
Yep, it did.
It certainly did. It grew back. It was
as Darren proved today on Twitter, because everything you see on the internet is accurate.
Yeah, don't look it up. It's true. It grew back. And so May 31st, okay, Joseph Johnson gets injured. And they say that it was the best shot in the Confederacy history, even though it was a Union guy, because now June 1st takes over, and now we get Robert E. Lee. Yep. So he's going to take over. Robert E. Lee, up to that point, had been managing the coastal defenses around Richmond. He'd been an advisor to Jefferson Davis.
Yeah, he was like basically an administrative role.
Right. Now he's a field commander. So it's similar to what McClellan took over after Second Manassas, except, Lee is much better at it. So he is doing his thing. McClellan, for the most part, is doing okay. Yep. I mean, it's taken, he's been a couple of months, he's been going at it, but all of a sudden, in May of 1862, Stonewall Jackson starts creeping across the Shenandoah Valley.
Yeah.
And he fights Nathaniel Banks from
Waltham,
Massachusetts. My hometown. You did it finally. You almost said it right, too. Waltham, Massachusetts is a tough one for you to say. It's pretty close. Pretty close. So he fights Nathaniel Banks, so he can write. He's a whole nother friggin' mess, but he's fighting Nathaniel Banks. He's pushing him down the Shenandoah, gets him across the Potomac. Lincoln sees this and thinks, holy shit, I have an opportunity to bag Jackson.
Yep.
He's exposed. He's separated from the army. I can go get him. You know how you are with the Twitter? You're kind of into the Twitter a lot.
Yep.
Borderline obsessed with the Twitter.
Yep. Lincoln's like the Telegraph.
The Telegraph, exactly. So he's picture Mary with her phone tweeting old pictures all the time. This is what Lincoln's doing with the Telegraph.
You're the same.
I resemble that. Anyway, Lincoln is telegraphing. Now you got a guy who now he wants to be part of this decision stuff. Yeah. So what does he do? He's going to telegraph directly to give orders to General John Fremont, as well as Irving McDowell. Now Fremont is going to be west of the Alleghenies. He's going to be right in the mountains. Versus McDowell is going to be in the Blue Ridge Mountains. So what he's going to do? He's going to telegraph both of them. He's going to have Fremont come from the west. He's going to have McDowell come from the east. And they're going to pull a pincer on Stonewall. And they're going to bag him. So he doesn't take McDowell's entire corps. He takes, out of the 40,000 guys, he takes 30,000. That's a lot of guys.
Yeah.
That's like a ballpark's worth of people. He takes 30,000 people away from McClellan to go chase Jackson. To Jackson's defense, he somehow gets out of it. They don't get him. But now, right when you were supposed to have that 30,000 guys was supposed to be basically on the right flank of McDowell. That's where he was supposed to, of McClellan. That's where he's supposed to be. Now there's 30,000 guys missing. So now his army is significantly weak. So you know what Lee does? He's
going to attack.
He's going to hit them right there.
Yep. And
right there.
That was just, oh my God, I can't imagine what that would have been like for McClellan.
And if you read some of the stories after the fact,
yeah,
a lot of people gave Lincoln credit for that plan because they thought it was audacious. That's a good, solid word. It was an audacious plan for the president to do, but it really was kind of irresponsible. It really was. It was misguided because, for one, he didn't tell McClellan.
No, which is, he should have told McClellan.
He didn't consult Mac. He told him after the fact, which is what he did. So now you have Lee basically, he wants to fight a defensive battle with McClellan, which we'll see later on with Antietam, which is kind of a big issue with him getting fired. But he wants to fight defensively. He also knows that Mac wants to fight defensively too. He starts to pull those maneuver in, they call it the Battle of Maneuvering is what they called it, where he's going to hit that weak spot on the flank. He's going to force McClellan out to attack him. And then he's going to pound him. Yeah. And at this point now, Jackson's going to arrive because that's what they do. They always seem to arrive right in the nick of friggin' time. These Confederate wars, it's like A.P. Hill and Antietam. Mm-hmm. Jackson's going to arrive. McDowell still doesn't have his guys. They're stuck in line at the Pizza Hut at Gettysburg again, probably. And so the 30,000 guys sent by Lincoln, they didn't arrive in time. And so you've got a significantly weaker thing. Now, admittedly, McClellan thought that he had, Lee was outnumbered, but at that moment, he kind of was, right? So you see in these battles, McDowell's entire corps is supposed to support his right flank right when Lee hit. So he pushes him over the north of the Chickahominy River, not to be confused with the Chattahoochee.
Whoa, look at you.
See, I've been practicing. See that?
Wow, and that was like your Massachusetts.
Well, look at you go.
Did I say it properly?
We got to time this one, definitely. But whew. But Lee ends up Fitzjohn Porter from the 5th Corps. We talked about it in 2nd Manassas. He's basically left to take that spot. And it takes Lee about 2 days to push him back. And it doesn't take a lot long. He pushes him back. And then now you're playing the what if game. What if McDowell had all his guys, right?
Yep.
Could it have been different? Some say it wouldn't have mattered. A lot of the Lincoln apologists and all those guys will sit there and say, oh, it didn't matter. The Lee people, he would have beat him anyway. And maybe he would have. Who the hell knows?
Yeah, it is.
Again, it goes back to that question before. You're coming off of Urbana.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're on the peninsula. You're doing pretty well, and you can see the spires. Is that what they call those damn things?
Yep, the spires of Richmond.
The spires of Richmond.
In like miles of Richmond,
right.
They can see it.
So
right
he's
there.
thinking, I'm gonna bag Richmond. I'm gonna be a goddamn hero, and I'm gonna end this war, and this is gonna be it. And now Lincoln pulls a bunch of his army away.
Yeah,
and he loses and has to retreat after Gainesville.
That would just be
right.
I don't know. And I mean, in not really defending Lincoln, but Lincoln is not there to see this stuff either. But this is an example, and we're going to see it until just after Gettysburg, and I'll mention this later too. But this is kind of like it's not really interference, but it's the government having a huge hand in how the war is playing out, and it's affecting it. And it will affect the outcome of. It does affect the outcome of a few battles that we will be definitely
almost all the battles actually.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it doesn't really. I don't think Lincoln really realizes it until just after Gettysburg. Just what the impact of that is.
I mean, he kind of screwed up with Grant a little bit by sending Charles Dana to spy on him, right?
Yeah, well, Dana and Grant end up becoming friends.
Right. But you can see, is Lincoln a micromanager?
Not in the same way that Jeff Davis was. I think Lincoln had men on his cabinet who were micromanagers. Like I think Stanton was. I don't think Gideon Welles was at all, but I think Stanton was, and I think Seward was to some extent, but I think Lincoln was getting a lot of pressure, and he had to do certain things to keep certain people happy. It's kind of like when he named Chase to be Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. That was not a decision that he really wanted to make, but he had pressure from certain people to do that for certain reasons. I think in this case, it's Lincoln's getting a lot of pressure, but Lincoln is also reading a lot about how the military works and all that. And at the time, he's still very new in his role as president. He's still learning as he goes, and he's going to make mistakes along the way. But I would not say he's a micromanager in the same way that Jeff Davis was. I think he had micromanagers around him, though, and that was
I would agree. I also think that Lincoln, in his defense now, was getting played a little bit by Stanton and Halleck. I mean, he was.
Oh, and Seward.
Seward too. People give McClellan shit about the overestimated the numbers. Well, where do you think you got the numbers from? You got the numbers from Halleck.
Yep, Halleck, and Pinkerton, and then Pinkerton was adding 5%, so he was doing my style of math.
He was doing Mary math. He must have been
we call it Mary McClellan math.
Mary McClellan math. Exactly. I got with the math, but I mean, so if you're McClellan, and again, we're not trying to defend McClellan. All we're trying to do is we're just trying to put it out there to give you an even look at it. Just make up your own freaking mind, about what it is, because he does get a bad rap in a lot of these things. He gets blamed for everything. I mean, he just does. So he's getting numbers fed to him that aren't true. He's having Lincoln, real or perceived, kind of middling in everything he does.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah. The other thing about McClellan's personality is McClellan was not one that liked failure. So when failure was staring him in the face, he would start to kind of balk at it. And that was just who he was. I mean, McClellan was he was arrogant. He had an ego on him. He was narcissistic. He wasn't like Grant and Sherman, who had experienced failures throughout their life into adulthood.
Yeah.
Failed careers and all that. Like he had not experienced that.
It's tough to experience failure as an Indians fan. You certainly know that feeling. I certainly don't think City of Champions here with 6 World Series and all these other 6 Super Bowls.
And where were the Red Sox this year?
I don't know this Red Sox you speak of.
Oh.
You know what? They won the World Series 2 years ago. So I'm just saying, there is a World Series. Indians fans that need to in case you're curious, there is a World Series.
Here's your burb for the show weeks.
But you've obviously handled failure pretty well. And so you got to think that he probably would have as well.
Yes.
But speaking of failure, he ends up getting pushed off the peninsula after the 7 days. And of course, he's going to get replaced because that's what they do. They're going to start replacing these guys left and right. So, and who do you think is pissed off about getting fired?
McClellan must have just been, he's been basically told to go stand in the corner.
That's probably exactly what he wrote when he sat there. General McClellan,
he'd go stand in the corner.
You can finish it.
Go fuck yourself.
If I had a nickel for every time you've told me that, Darren, go stand in the corner. But so his dislike of Lincoln. I mean, before he's pissed. He's been meddled, but he's still in command. Now he's fired. Now he's legit freaking pissed off. Because don't forget, he saw himself as the young Napoleon. He was the one who was going to save the day. He trained the army. He had everything going.
The media's playing him up too. That's the other thing too. Is like McClellan is like, think of some celebrity that's constantly in the newspapers. McClellan is a celebrity general at this time, and the media is just feeding that ego that he has.
Well, everyone loves a military hero. I mean, they do. I mean, you saw the Grant stories in D.C. after the But I mean, McClellan saw all of this as his chance to be on Mount Rushmore. I know there wasn't existent back. I think it was existent back then, but he was going to be one of those figure mastheads in American history, and he was probably on his way if you think about it. Mm-hmm. He was going to be probably the greatest general, arguably since George Washington, maybe in his mind. I mean, true or perceived, that's what he was going to see. And then he writes that letter to Lincoln after he basically gets fired, and he says, you have done your best to sacrifice this army.
Yeah. Oh, it's total pack your bags. We're going on a fucking guilt trip.
Can you imagine if you told that to your boss?
Oh, I would be fucking gone.
If you said, you've done your best to sacrifice this Dairy Queen, what they would say to you, how pissed they'd be.
Oh, it would not fly. It would not fly.
No, but that's what he does. Historians and other people who study history, I guess would be a historian if you think about it.
Other people who study history.
Historians and people who study history basically use these quotes to create this image of McClellan. So everything he did well was gone. And while you're destroying McClellan, you're also building up Lincoln at the same time. It's natural.
Exactly.
It creates this complete hatred of all things McClellan.
Yep.
Right? They always said the people who know you the best are the best, have the best opinion of you, whether correct or incorrect.
Yep.
The people who still loved him were his soldiers who were with him every single day.
Absolutely.
Right?
They did, yeah.
So you think, well, all these guys love him. And I know, look, he was a flawed guy in a lot of different ways, but he sees in his mind, in this, with again, opinion, not fact, he sees a plan. He's obsessed with the Brown plan that is going to win. He sees the rug taken out from under him by Lincoln.
Yep.
Meanwhile, Lincoln's telling him, you got to be aggressive. You got to be aggressive. Then he goes to be aggressive. He goes, whoa.
Stop.
7 years you're going to wait. And so McClellan is like, well, okay. He, licks his wounds, rubs it off, whatever the hell you want to call that phrase. Now he gets to Peninsula, and the same thing kind of happens again.
Yep.
He's that close to Richmond. He can hear the bells churning.
Yep.
Right? He gets put in. He had to have thought he had it. I mean, you got to think how close you can get. He could have tasted it. He thought it was going to be so good. 2-month campaign, he's going to sack Richmond. He's going to be the king. He's going to be, whatever. Yeah. He's going to basically get pushed off. And this is where you're going to start to see a lot of the stories come out against him about the whole lazy and sluggish and Jamestown and all this other stuff. Because what people like in war, they like boldness, right? They like to go get him, right? And the pundits start to lack his aggressiveness. All these people in the newspaper, he's not aggressive. He's timid. And that's the thing about it, though, is the perception was Lincoln got rid of McClellan because he wasn't aggressive enough. Yeah. Right? And so it kind of goes back to Antietam again. Well, who the hell who took over after Antietam?
Burnside, who was
the most least
aggressive general. And the story behind Burnside taking over is they basically went up to Burnside and they're like, do you want the position? And Burnside's like, no. And the guy's like, okay, fine. We're going to go give it to Hooker if you don't want it. And then Burnside just hated Hooker so much. He's like, okay, fine, I'll take it. Burnside to me it's always perplexed me because Lincoln wanted somebody aggressive. And then.
So you start to see, maybe you start to see some cracks in the overall opinion of McClellan, where people say McClellan, they got rid of McClellan because he wasn't aggressive, right? He's aggressive in Urbana. He wants to be aggressive. He gets the rug pulled out from under him. He wants to be aggressive on the 7 days, and he's doing well. And again, the Stonewall Jackson comes out. It's the whole, it goes back to that whole the need to hate McClellan. I think historically, right? You begin to feed the monster. Here's McClellan needs to be hated. So here's why. We're going to throw all this stuff at you. But when you look at the stuff, it doesn't add up in a lot of ways.
No, it doesn't.
Like you're going to bash him for not being aggressive, right? But then anybody who says that he was fired for not being aggressive has got to explain the Burnside thing to me, because I don't get it, and no one does.
I don't understand it either. And I mean, too, like, the more I look at McClellan, like I did after the episode we did about Antietam, like, yes, McClellan made mistakes after Antietam, but I did come to respect him more as somebody who could organize the fuck out of an army. The one thing that I see a lot of, I guess, parallels with is with Howard. Just this whole, there's so much hate on McClellan. Well, guess what? There's a lot of hate on Howard. You mentioned Oliver Otis Howard. Everybody always says, oh, he fucked up at Chancellorsville. That's where they stop. They don't remember he won a Medal of Honor and all that. But like McClellan is kind of, I'm starting to see him in that same light that, okay, like, yeah, he was arrogant. He was a dick, whatever. But he did a lot of good with the AOP, with organizing it. And he was held back a lot by government red tape. There was a lot of that going on too.
Do you know red tape is a Civil War phrase? You know where it came from? You know where it came from?
I'm trying to think.
Oh, is that what that humming? Is that what that humming noise is?
Fucker.
When Civil War soldiers went to get their pensions after the war.
Oh, right.
Go to Washington, D.C. to get their pension. And then when they got there, the pension envelope was wrapped in red tape.
Do you know here in Ontario, we have a minister of red tape? I'm shit you not.
Really?
Yep.
You guys got all kinds of stuff. You guys got Santa Claus up there and all kinds of stuff. So
we have a minister of red tape in our Ontario government.
That's pretty cool. I want that job. You make them. I'll move to Canada. You give me that job.
Yeah, the minister of red tape. Yeah, I mean, he's something, and minister of red tape.
That's pretty cool. A good sense of humor. But when you look at this whole thing with McClellan, what does the government start to do now? Now they're using McClellan as the scapegoat for all the problems, right?
Yeah.
Perceived or not. You get that quote from your friend Edward Stanton, okay, where he writes, and he writes in his thing, if Mac had 1 million men, he'd swear the enemy had 2 million, and then he'd sit in the mud and yell for 3.
Yeah.
That's the quote from Edward Stanton. So this is stuff he's saying. So what is that doing? He's taken the administration off the hook for all their mistakes they probably made by meddling.
Yeah.
And he's putting it onto McClellan. And this begins to get that national subculture now. It begins to get that national perception.
Yeah.
And national perception in time turns into historical memory.
Exactly.
Which never goes away.
If you look at the history of how Stanton is with people, Stanton tend to do the whole Michael Corleone thing of like, let's make it personal. You can tell that Michael Corleone is not my favorite character in The Godfather.
Really?
I'm Team Sonny. Anyway, but if you look at stuff Stanton does down the road, in particular with Sherman, with his surrender to Johnston, and how he totally throws Sherman under the bus with those terms. He does a smear campaign against him in the newspaper, which was completely uncalled for. And that was all because Stanton had something personal against Sherman. And I think Stanton, as you said, like, excellent point, he's trying to deflect away from the government's, like, just all the red tape they caused, and they're putting it back on McClellan.
Now, here's another thing I know we talked about the other day, and this is not fact. This is just my own opinion. So take it for what it's worth. It means it's going to be true. Okay. So basically with McClellan he was the beginning of the war and not the end of the war.
Yeah.
Because don't forget, the beginning of the war, they thought this was going to be a milk run. They thought this was going to be a 30-day war. This is going to be easy. And now McClellan's losing or having a tough time, and he's taken forever. When Lincoln is saying, this thing's supposed to be friggin' over. Why the hell is this taking so long? And McClellan and Sherman in the West, they knew this wasn't going to be a friggin' easy little thing. They knew it was going to be a long time. So it's taken McClellan a long time, and they don't like that. And so it's like, well, we want this thing to end. And and if any proof of that, if you think I'm wrong with this one, which you probably do, but any proof that you might think is wrong versus the later in the war, it took 2 months for McClellan to almost get Richmond. almost, right? And he gets run on a rail. He screwed the whole thing up.
And then Grant's out in the West fucking around Vicksburg for 9 months.
Right, but look at Grant comes over the Overland campaign in 64.
Yeah.
It takes him 9 months to get Richmond. 9 months versus 2. And it took McClellan a lot. I mean, granted, Lee's army was stronger.
Yeah.
Versus Grant. But it took Grant 9 months to get to Richmond. He had to go through Spotsylvania and James River and Petersburg and the Yellow Tavern. All those battles that went down the Overland campaign.
Yep.
9 months. They went through Cold Harbor. They lost 7,500 guys in 15 minutes. He doesn't get blamed per se for that. People realize that at that point that the war was a hellish frigging thing at that point. McClellan did not get that respect. He got the whole, this war is easy, you got to win this, and it took a while. I think if they switch roles, I think if Grant was the guy at the beginning and McClellan was the guy at the end, it would be the exact historical reversal. I think so. I think you see McClellan will be the hero because he would have taken his time and he was aggressive. I mean, Lincoln finally took the training wheels off of Grant and said, fuck it, whatever the hell you want now. Fuck the okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, he lets him do Vicksburg for like 9 months. He is writing him and saying like, oh my God, like what's going on out there kind of thing. But yeah, like at the time, the perception of the war in the media was that there was that quote where it was, this is going to be a war that the blood spilled is going to feel like a thimble. And that was it.
Well, he said it was like a handkerchief, right?
Yeah. No, I think it was a thimble.
I think it was a handkerchief. I think he said with the blood being spilt, you could clean it with a handkerchief.
Yeah, Google that.
Go to the film. Okay. You can send your apologies to djweeks41@yahoo.com. Okay.
Jesus.
So, but I think going to the overall point, though, I think these guys weren't treated the same, and I think a lot of it was timing. I think that was a big, big part of it. I think McClellan was still under the impression that the war was going to be easy at the time. Grant, at the end, they realized it was a different type of war than they thought, and they gave Grant a lot more leeway.
Okay, I have your answer.
Well, yeah.
After a lady's thimble will hold all the blood that will be shed.
Okay, that's not right. That's bull. That's BS. There's another quote. Sorry, maybe we're both right. There's another quote that says with the handkerchief. I've seen it.
Well, I just read the lady's thimble one, and I heard it in Justin Martin's book about Antietam as well.
All right, well, you can go in the corner.
Maybe we're both right, fucker.
Maybe we're both right.
Holy fuck.
I think we're both right. Look at you quick to prove me wrong. So, okay, we get to Antietam. He eventually gets fired. We're going to talk in a few minutes about some of the letters that people wrote about this. Some people, we'll play a little game, or I'll read a quote and you tell me who they were. How's that for an idea?
All right,
okay,
that sounds good.
Okay, I'll make up for that disgusting display a few minutes ago.
We were probably both right.
I was probably both. I'm just kidding. All right. Go ahead, say it. Actually, Darren. Actually. You know what, Mary? It's nothing you need to be ashamed of. Oh, that's so funny. maybe someday you'll hear that story. But
maybe.
but so Lincoln, he gets rid of Mac, okay? And you can tell Lincoln at this point has had it with McClellan. You got to look at a little bit of the backstory here. It goes back to that September 2nd, 1862. He went on the limb for McClellan. He did. Everyone wanted him gone. So now Lincoln feels that McClellan, he's acting slow again. He beats him in Antietam. He's going to get his Emancipation Proclamation.
Yep.
But in his mind, he's going to need to go chase down Lee and beat him. We're going to see this later on at Gettysburg with Meade. Yep. Same deal, okay? And so Lincoln writes a fantastic Mean Girls letter.
September 13th, which we are recording,
which is
the anniversary of this letter.
And I have the original letter here.
Oh, do you?
I do. I got it. Me and Ben Gates went and got it. It's got it right here, okay? So I'll read this letter to you right now, okay? So this is October 13th, 1862. Lincoln writes to Mac, "You remember me speaking to you of what I called you about being your overcautiousness, or not your overcautiousness when you assume that you could not do what the enemy is constantly doing. Should you not claim to be at least his equal in prowess and acts upon his claim?" And then he goes on, "Is it as if easy for our troops to march well as the enemy, and it is unmanly to say you cannot do it?" Which is a classic, and the horse you rode in on. That's a whole in the cavalry you wrote in on quote from Lincoln.
The shade.
Do you think?
That's shady. Like
that's four score and go fuck yourselves.
It is. Yeah. He's basically
right?
saying like, you know what, dude, you need to move or you need to just go stand in the corner and go fuck yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously, there are other letters that went back and forth. In full disclosure, we couldn't find them.
Yeah, we were looking for them. We couldn't find them. I think I was reading this letter today too, and I think it's like, Lincoln at the time, he had spoken to his secretaries about it, and he had said that he was going to basically give McClellan a chance, like one more chance, and that was it. And this was that letter. But I don't think what Lincoln grasped completely was the state that the Army of the Potomac was in after Antietam.
That's a big thing. And we're going to go about that. We have some great quotes to talk about that. After Antietam, you got to remember too, McClellan took over this army and it was a mess when he took it over. And this is just a few weeks before. And it wasn't all this. And the Army of the Potomac was basically in a complete friggin' utter mess. And the perception is that he had Lee on the rails. He had him beat. All he had to do was just stick his hand out. And use that quote later on with Meade. You had him in your fingers. You just need to close your hand, right? This one was a little bit different because Lincoln, he basically McClellan was like, he intended he was just going to stay in Sharpsburg. He had no intention of doing a campaign. And that was part of his big thing. You're not being aggressive enough again. You don't want to you just want to sit on your ass here and you have no intention to campaign. And that got debunked on a letter I found that McClellan wrote to his wife on September 22nd, 1862. And I quote, I look upon the Maryland campaign as substantially ended, and my present intention is to secure Harper's Ferry and hold it with a strong force, then go to work and reorganize the army and ready for another campaign. So he was ready to move. He wanted to reform. Yep. He wanted to go get Harper's Ferry, and he wanted to go get him. So that goes completely in the face of what Lincoln said. Now, could McClellan be bullshitting his wife? He's not the first guy to lie to his freaking wife. That's what
I mean. Some of the right. Some of the letters that McClellan writes to his wife are pretty grandiose and over the top, like his letter after the Battle of Antietam, where he's like, the spectacle yesterday was the grandest I could conceive of. Nothing could be more sublime, that kind of stuff. So he is writing her some pretty grandiose stuff.
Yeah. And the story, again, that the perceived story, the national memory says that Lincoln did everything he could to push Mac, including the October 4th visit to Antietam. And then on 10/6, Lincoln ordered Mac to move. Mac remained and complained his supply requests were not met, and it was impractical to move. And so and that's going to be, we're going to get some good quotes on that here in a second, because what Lincoln is saying is, I told the fucking guy to move. And he's bitching about supplies, and that's not an issue, blah, blah, blah.
But if you look at the quotes, if you look at the history.
We went to the Civil War Breakfast Club vault in the headquarters over here to dig out some letters that Ben Gates got for us, okay? And there was a lot of quotes that completely, I don't want to say exonerate McClellan with this, but they basically prove that the supply thing was wrong. Now, what surprised me about these quotes was up to that point, Rufus Ingalls had did a real good job as a quartermaster. Yeah. But he did a lot better with the ammunition and stuff like that. But the clothes and the food was a freaking mess. So
and the shoes were the biggest thing. The shoes were the biggest thing.
So you say Antietam was fought over shoes?
No, it's fought over Legos.
But you better tell Ted Burns. Got that
fought over Legos.
So basically, there's a captain in the 27th Indiana. His name is Edmund Brown. Okay, not to be confused with Doc Brown. Edmund Brown. Okay, great Scott. Many of the regiments were shoeless. Pants were torn at the seat, frayed at the bottom with no coats or no coats at all, or torn at the seams. This is like you leaving the mine, actually, is what it sounds like right here, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, it's foreshadowing my future, isn't it?
Exactly. As quartermaster, he knows the regiment was in worse shape than he's ever seen in all of history. That's a quote he has. So what these people are saying, this guy says, is these guys had no shoes. Their pants, their asses were hanging out of their pants. Their jackets, if they even had a jacket. This is going into September, which is getting pretty cold, right? He wants supplies. He says, before we're going to go on this campaign, we're going to be going into Virginia. We have no supply line. These dudes have no shoes. They got no pants. Their freaking asses are hanging out. You
Yeah.
know?
And they've got to get the supplies before they get into Virginia because they're going into enemy territory at that point. So they got to get it when the supply lines are open for them.
Right, exactly. So Lincoln said attack while the roads are open, but it doesn't make a difference. Colonel Charles Wainwright from the artillery, who fought at Gettysburg, was a big guy at Gettysburg,
Yep.
he writes, a good deal of suffering among our men of want of clothing, especially blankets and shoes. I don't suspect we will remain here long in Sharpsburg, but still our supplies have not come, and they were promised from Washington long ago.
Yep.
So this is 9/26/1862. The Battle of Gettysburg, of Antietam was 10 days before, 9 days before.
Yep.
Now, you can roller skate backwards with your four wheels and your tight shirt and shorts and your headband, like we talked about, backwards from Washington to Sharpsburg in 10 days. Maybe I can't, but you probably can.
Okay? No, that would be a disaster.
Just don't forget your whistle.
That'd be worse than me singing, actually.
Okay. But again, and what's interesting about the Wainwright letter is he thought they were coming. It sounds like that we were expecting supplies and they're fucking not coming. And this is some things we'll see more later on with this administration on Fredericksburg down the road with promised things that never came.
Which we're going to talk about.
Right. And so it's what I'm saying is this is a common thing. And for McClellan, again, opinion, not fact, this is what he's dealing with, okay? Burnside is another quote I have from early October 1862. Burnside rides with Lincoln. He rode with Lincoln. It's in Sharpsburg. And mentioned one of his regiments, the 9th New York, suffered greatly from a loss of meat and vegetables. And they were always assured the food was coming soon, and it never came.
Yep.
So again, this is another guy. Whether it was true or not, they were under the impression that before we go campaign again, and if you're going to believe McClellan's letter to his wife, that they were going to go, but they were waiting on supplies. And it didn't sound like they were waiting for stupid shit. They weren't waiting for,
No, they were waiting. They were waiting for food. They're waiting for shoes, and they're going to need the shoes, especially coming up because the weather's getting colder. But you can't be marching your troops. And the one thing about McClellan is he cared immensely about his troops. Like he wanted them to be well supplied and all that. Like you're not gonna take them somewhere where they don't have adequate supplies because you're gonna wear yourself out before you even get to the enemy.
And these aren't, Marcina Patrick, who was a division commander, actually brigade commander in the First Corps at Antietam. He says the officers and men were without clothing. Now he might have been Hooker and Butterfield. We don't know, but but what they're saying is these guys had no clothes. I mean, I don't think they probably had some clothes, but I mean, they were but they were torn out to the point you were saying before. Elijah Hunt Rhodes, one of the guys we talked about, I have his diary, and I looked at his diary because I wanted to get a quote from Antietam because I knew he mentioned it. He writes, good Rhode Island guy, by the way, Ben Frail, thinking of you.
Yep.
Okay.
Hey, Ben.
Team Wheaton. He says, so Rhodes says, in spite of our old, torn, and ragged clothes, the troops looked well, and the line stretched over hills and plains. So again, he's putting a positive spin on it. He said the people they're in good spirits, but their clothes. I mean, this is a common theme about this, and so it basically just goes with the whole thing where Lincoln told Mac, and this is where it gets funny too, is when Lincoln left McClellan, he basically told him, and I quote, he told me when he was leaving, he said that he was entirely satisfied with me. It would stand by me at all comers, right? So he says Lincoln told him, "I got your back, don't worry," and that obviously didn't happen. Now, I'm going to read you this one more quote, and I want you to tell me who this is.
Okay.
And I think you know because we talked about this, but pretend you don't, okay?
Okay, yeah.
All right. We are in the heavy expectation of marching orders. We have been determined here by the failure of the government to push forward reinforcement and supplies. Telegraphing was requested of supplies is sent back as early as October 7th, and we have not received them yet. So who said this quote?
That's George Gordon Meade writing to
George Gordon Meade.
He's writing to his wife, Margaret.
Right. So George Gordon Meade is saying, we're planning on going. We want to go. Everyone wants to go, but we have nothing. We have no food. We have no food. We have no supplies. Our pets' heads are falling off. And go. So again, it paints that picture of, did McClellan really sit on his ass at Antietam and not move?
Yeah,
because he just didn't want to go, or maybe, just maybe, he wanted to go and didn't feel his army, who he'd been developing and training and all these years, was not equipped to go ahead and adequately fight Lee.
Yep, and that's it's interesting. The one thing I was thinking about, so here's McClellan not moving because he feels that his army is not equipped enough and he doesn't want to, because he does have the best, I mean, despite how arrogant and narcissistic he is, he has the best interest of his army at heart, and he doesn't want them to, like, I mean, again, it goes back to the failure thing. But, you know, so Lincoln writes him that letter and basically tells him get his ass in gear, and McClellan's like, you need to get me fucking supplies. And November 5th, I hope I'm getting the date right, he's fired. Mm-hmm. So you flash forward to July 1863. General Meade is now in charge of the Army of the Potomac, and he doesn't pursue Lee right away. And Lincoln writes him a very, basically, why aren't you doing this? Like, just tearing a strip off him letter, which he never sends, which good for Lincoln. But I think the thing that Lincoln realized in that, he reread the letter and decided not to send it. I think he realized, holy shit, this is what McClellan was going through at Antietam, because Meade is basically doing the exact same thing. He's telling me his troops are not in any shape to move. He's lost X number of corps commanders, division commanders. And I think Lincoln, that's when that was kind of the turning point for him, when he realized, like, McClellan wasn't making shit up. McClellan wasn't moving for a reason. No. I'm now seeing it. I'm seeing it now with Meade. And you see after that a bit of a shift in how Lincoln does things. And the other thing too that shows just the government involvement and the red tape is in June of 1863, John Reynolds is called to the White House to have a meeting with Lincoln, and Lincoln offers him the position in the Army of the Potomac. And Reynolds is like, no fucking way, unless you can tell me you're not going to interfere, unless I can have full control, there's no way I'm taking over this army. And Lincoln's like, nope, I can't do that. And the one thing about Reynolds is he was good friends with McClellan, and he was probably privy to a lot of the stuff that was happening. So I think those two examples right there are kind of illustrating to what you're saying, Darren, about this. You know, well, you need to look at more from McClellan's perspective and what was going on.
Well, perceived or reality. Yeah. It was like, you know how, like, you know, you mentioned the whole job thing again. Someone's going to take a position in a job, and everyone says, you know what, the boss is a dick. Don't take the job. He's just going to micromanage you. Maybe this is one of those cases, because clearly word got around that Lincoln and Halleck and Stanton and the rest of the cabinet were going to be having your thumb on you wherever you go. They're going to tell you what to do. They're going to do orders. They're not going to tell you they're going to do them. They're going to tell you after the fact. And then you know what they're going to do? When it fails, they're going to blame you. Yeah. And that's a common theme throughout this administration. Now, truth or not, that's the perception. It's obvious that the generals had, because the proof, to your point, is the Reynolds story. Because I would think that if you're John Reynolds, West Point guy, hero, the whole deal, that would be his dream job, wouldn't it?
Oh, absolutely. You know, he saw McClellan go down, he saw Burnside go down, and he saw Hooker go down. And he was probably, like, he was friends with McClellan. He was probably privy to a lot of shit.
Well, the fact that he asked Lincoln, he says, if I take this job, will you tell me that you're not going to interfere and meddle?
And Lincoln's like, no.
The fact that he even asked that, and so either he saw it, which he clearly saw it, or they told him, just so you know, the boss is going to be a dick. He's going to be all over your ass. So just try to set that up. And so it goes to show that he was, you know, I mean, look, at the end of the day, Lincoln helped win the war. All the stuff that we said at the beginning, he freed the slaves. Everything is absolutely right. Okay, he did all that stuff. Yep. But I think you got to look at the other side of the coin, though, that the people, and again, this goes back to this national historical memory now, that it's important to look at these other guys in real time, and not with the 150 years of hindsight and reading all the books and hearing all the shit about these people. Whether you like McClellan or not, it doesn't even matter. What matters is you got to look at the plight he had, put yourself in that same shoes, and think maybe he was trying to do what he could, and maybe he was being held back. And a lot of the stuff that we're told about the slow and the sluggish and the overestimating, there's more to the story. And I think that story needs to be researched a little bit more. And that's what I came coming out of this was, I think McClellan had a lot of promise. I think he was very arrogant. I think he was very egotistical.
Yeah, but who wasn't? Warren was arrogant. Warren was arrogant.
Right.
A lot of them were.
But I think he saw himself as the guy who was going to save the country. When you look at that early letter, he said, "I saved the country twice now." So he really thought. So he, you know, he's no angel either. But I think in his mind, the victors get to write the stories, and as soon as as soon as he got fired from Antietam and he began to run for president in 1864, he wrote that 476-page diatribe bashing Lincoln. And he made that his campaign. And you wonder how much it was wanting to end the war versus how much you wanted to just beat Lincoln. And I think when you look at the whole thing and the stories written, I think it's just important to look and just see maybe there's more, like I said, there's more to the story.
There's always more to the story. And I mean, the historical memory thing, the most prominent place it's seen is in Sherman's March to the Sea. But I think the historical memory thing needs to be applied to more situations in the Civil War like this. Like I said at the beginning, we're not bashing Lincoln. We're not putting him down, but we just want people to think about the other side of it. Like, look at it from McClellan's perspective. And then, you look at the evidence, like you look at Reynolds turning down the job because he had probably was like, I don't want to be micromanaged because I don't want to be the next one fired when we lose the battle. Like that's where they were at with it. But too, and then you look at the letter that Lincoln writes to Meade, and then he doesn't send it. And I think that was kind of Lincoln's moment where he was like, shit, McClellan actually was not moving for a reason. And he sees that Meade is not moving because he's got the interests of the army at heart. He's not pushing them because he knows they can't do it. And McClellan too.
Well, the pre-64 election, the post-64 election, Lincoln's totally different.
Oh,
and I think, and I think it goes back to what we were saying at the beginning of this a while ago now, is I think the perception was the war was an easy win. It was a 2-foot putt. And the longer it took, the more it made Lincoln look bad. And I think there was a lot of politics involved. He wanted a quick blitzkrieg type war to put them away.
Yep.
But I don't think Lincoln realized, like McClellan did, and certainly Sherman did, that this was not that war. This war was going to be long. It was going to be grueling. And it was going to cost hundreds of thousands of lives and millions of dollars to win this. They were going to have to go into the South and just destroy them. They knew that's how it had to be. And Lincoln at the beginning thought that he was going to call up the 75,000 guys, and they were going to go down there, and it was going to be like, paintball. They were just going to go finish these guys off, and it was going to be over. And that's how a lot of people thought. I mean, and it didn't turn out that way. And that's why I think that if McClellan had been put into position later, if he took over the army around the Overland campaign, because the Confederation was done after Atlanta. They were done.
Oh, yeah.
And if he would have won that, he would have eventually taken Richmond. Maybe he ends up being the hero. And who knows? McClellan's still McClellan. He's still the arrogance and all that stuff. But I think a lot of the stuff written about him is unfair, personally.
Oh, I do too. No. I 100% agree with you about that. I've been thinking that since, again, this is why one of the reasons I love doing this podcast with you is I'm doing he's just brushing off his shoulder for some reason. He's proud of himself.
Oh, I don't know. I'm just going to sit over here and be right.
Yep. God. Anyway, getting back to my point that I was trying to make there, I've started to respect McClellan more, see things a little bit differently. It's really interesting when you start to do just a closer look at stuff and examine what's out there, how different it is, how much historical memory is playing into the Civil War with things, not just the March to the Sea, but with the perception of McClellan, which, I still say McClellan was an arrogant bastard. But does he deserve the reputation he has? I don't think he does. He was having to fight with a lot. He's having to go through with the bureaucracy in Washington, and we're going to see that with Burnside at Fredericksburg. I think Hooker goes through it as well. They all experience it, and if you're the lead general and you're going to be the one on the chopping block, it's kind of like if you're the CEO of a company, then you are the one that falls first.
Well, exactly. Here's your chance to do it. Go win me the war in 10 minutes.
Yep.
And then they try.
Yeah.
But I think by researching this, it proves a couple things. I think McClellan was more aggressive than people think he was.
Yep, absolutely.
I think he was getting fed bullshit numbers from the cabinet as far as what he's fighting with.
Yeah.
But the biggest indictment, I think, and Lincoln doesn't have any fingerprints on this at all. But you see what Stanton, especially with that one quote about the troops, they blame the generals for all the mistakes. They blame every single one of them. Every guy who went through it, you get his ass to kick out the door. Just you see you later, and they just trash him. But McClellan was the worst. McClellan was the worst. He was a target. He brought a lot upon himself because he wrote a lot of letters himself, and he'd said a lot of stupid things. Haven't we all? But you certainly haven't.
Oh, I have. Trust me, I'm going to be hearing about it for the next 30 some years.
Oh, you certainly. But I think at the end of the day. Oh yeah, shit. But I think at the end of the day, it proves that every one of these guys you look at, we've been fed a line of history our entire lives, because no one's a Confederate, no one's a Union, none of us fought there, none of us were there, but we were taught a certain line of thinking, and some of it is reality, some of it's fact, some of it's fiction. But like anything else, don't just read. Always question what you read and see what the best thing is, and make up your own decisions. Because I think if you do, you'll find that some of the stuff you've been taught maybe is a little bit embellished to help an overall agenda that people might have.
Yep, absolutely. There's always an agenda. That's why I say, like, when you're reading, I mean, as wonderful as Grant's memoirs are, he has an agenda. Same with Sherman, even with Howard, his autobiography, they all have an agenda. And you have to look at different things and to really understand what was going on in this war, And I mean, Lincoln was a brilliant man. He's a brilliant president, but, he's having to find his way through something that he's in uncharted territory too. And he's going to make mistakes along the way. And Stanton, probably my least favorite cabinet member. And, for many reasons, but
he's a dick.
Yeah, he is. Yep. Yeah. And I mean, just what he does to Sherman, because he's out to get Sherman. You can see that, during the March to the Sea. You can see it when he gets to Savannah and all this other stuff that he's out to get him. So there is, if you look at like the evidence even that happens after that, when it's not a one-time thing, when it's like, okay, this is a pattern with this person, you start to see the bigger picture. And I'm really glad we explored this in this episode. And I think it's kind of, I would like to explore more of this in other episodes. I think other kind of historical memory, and look at, okay, well, what might be the actual case with this when you start looking at it a little bit closer.
Yeah, and again, to your point, Mary, at the beginning, it's not about McClellan's right, Lincoln was wrong, or vice versa. It's like anything else. It's this, he said, she said, and the truth is somewhere in, well, probably she said, but in somewhere in the middle is usually how it goes, right? And so the whole thing is researching enough to make up your own decisions. You know what? If you think McClellan's a dick, which he probably is, that's totally cool. If you think Lincoln is fucked up, that's totally cool too. But it's important to look at both sides of it and help make up your own decisions. So check it out. There's always some good resources to get out there and read it. But I think it's a pretty good study to look at and just get an idea of maybe, and just to see how legit these guys really are with their stuff. And just, because just a lot of the stuff you've been read is the stuff that's been agenda driven. So, yeah. So
I think that's a good place to wrap up, because we are definitely over 1 hour.
Yeah, well, about an hour and 15 minutes. You're going to have some editing to do, Mara.
Yeah, I am. I will, but I enjoy doing it. So thank you to Darren for doing a lot of the research for this episode. Awesome on it.
No, thank you very much. Hey, I am just happy to be part of the team, Mara.
Hey, well, I'm happy to have you along with this. So I wouldn't want to do it with anybody else.
Aw, look at you. Now I'll just go stand in the corner over here now.
Probably call you a fucker as soon as I stop recording it.
Yeah, I usually do. Anyway, so once again, we'll be jumping on Facebook Live on 10 a.m. on Saturday to talk, well, on paper anyway, about McClellan. I hope people do want to talk about McClellan, because I think that'd be a cool thing to talk about. I think people would like, or anybody wants to talk about, a week from Wednesday, we're going to be doing our inaugural Civil War Breakfast Club roundtable. Ooh la la. Yep. So if you're interested in doing that, you have to email us, quote, Mary, at Civil War Breakfast Club @gmail.com. And one of us, Mary, will be responding to you. And then we'll get a little group together, and then one of us, Mary, will email the Zoom code to you so we can do it. So it's going to be a lot of fun. It's not going to be a lecture. It's not going to be some stuffed shirt reading us dusty books. We just want to get together and talk about whatever's on your mind. Make it fun, just like the lives do. So that'll be cool. Next week we are doing
episode 10. So we are doing something fun for that. Each of us is going to bring a few generals that we would like to have a beer with. That's tell the other what we're doing. Right. So it's going to be kind of a fun, lighthearted episode. The week after that, we are going to be, hoping in dates right, we're going to be talking ghosts with our guest.
We're going to be doing the Ghost of Gettysburg. We're going to be talking with our friend Jen Price, who we call Jay Price.
Yep.
And she'll be coming on talking some cool ghost stories, and we'll talk about that right around the Halloween season before Mary goes out and eggs those cars and toilet papers those trees. And we'll be able to get out there and talk a little bit about some ghosts. So we're gonna have some fun. These next couple weeks we're gonna have some fun. Then we'll get back into November. We're gonna do some
November's a busy Civil War related month for us, and we are actually going to be putting out some videos just to tell you guys what we're getting up to each week too. We're going to try and start doing a little bit more of that because we can do that on Twitter, let you know what we're going to be talking about. But yeah, November is going to be probably Gettysburg Address, Franklin, Battles for Chattanooga, all that fun stuff.
A lot of some good stuff on the horizon. So the dance card, Mary, is full. So anyways, this is always a good time with you. It was always a pleasure nerding out with you, as always. So we look forward to talking to you soon. So again, live on Saturday morning at 10. And then we'll do this again next week. And then we'll be doing our first roundtable, which is going to be really, really cool. That'll be a lot of fun.
That's going to be awesome. So anyway, until next time, have a wonderful Saturday, because that's when you're going to be listening to this. Hopefully you join us for our Facebook Live at 10 o'clock. And until then, we'll see you all again soon.
Peace out.
Okay, bye guys.